Okay, so starting this session, we have Stephen Miller, who is going to talk to us about my papers. What shall I do with them?
Okay, thank you very much. I wish to thank Steve for asking me to give this paper. This came about because I was in the Folklore Society library talking to Caroline Oates, and I was talking about, as we've been talking today, and we'll talk today about what's going to happen to my stuff after I go. Not that I'm hoping to go for quite a while yet, but what's going to happen to my stuff. And I came up with this particular phrase, this idea of the Internet 1.0 researcher, of people whose materials are basically on hard drives, on floppy disks, on zip drives, wherever they are, and stuff that's no longer in analog form. And she said, well, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you actually tell us what you think about it? And so I gave the paper, and then Steve heard the paper and asked me to give the paper again. It's not the same paper. There's a few extra slides in it as well. So this is it. So, but he is quite right. He says this is another doom and gloom paper. I think I'm rather going to be a Jeremiah here, but basically saying things. I don't think it's going to be all that good. Where does the talk title come from? Well, it comes from this letter written by A.W. Moore. A.W. Moore, responsible for Manx Ballads and Music. It's written in 1893 to the German folklorist Karl Roeder. And what I was being surprised by when I was doing the sort of research for this particular paper is how early the early folklorists, the early folk song collectors were thinking about what was going to happen to their papers after they go. I was really surprised how early it was. This comes about, A.W. Moore had published his book on the folklore of the Isle of Man in 1891. He found out that the David Nutt had published more copies than he had expected, and they weren't selling. And so he thought, well, what's going to happen with all the ancillary materials I've got? And so what he basically said to Karl Roeder was, what you should be thinking about doing is to publish everything. Don't actually leave everything lying around in manuscript. And it's absolutely true. Moore dies 1909. There's a massive bonfire at Cronkburn House, and all of his papers go. It's not just his papers for Manx Ballads and Music, his papers for Manx folklore, his history of the Isle of Man, all his antiquarian stuff, and all his work as a statesman as well. He was a Speaker of the House of Keys as well in the Isle of Man. Simply goes, all we have left is a notebook appropriately called Manx Odds and Ends, and that's all there is. And there's some of the proof sheets for the tunes that appeared in Manx Ballads and Music. And we'll also find out too that Karl Roeder was not another happy camper as well when it comes to his particular papers as well. This is a new slide. This is what I was going to actually call the talk. What are you planning to do with your Nachlass? I live in Austria, and it's a wonderful German word, this, the Nachlass. There's two spellings of it, depending on whether you got the old or the new spelling of it. It's basically your after leavings. Yes, it's great. It's from after and lassen, to leave, and it's called your after leavings. And it's a vast Germanic literary industry that edits sort of anything and everything that's left behind. The reason why I was quite worried about this was I was in hospital last week, and this is what one of my friends said to me before I went into hospital. He said, what are you planning to do with your Nachlass? Well, I was hoping to worry about it after I come out of hospital. But if other people are worrying about what I should be doing with my literary remains, then maybe I should be getting worried about them as well. Okay, let's have a little bit. I don't want to dwell too much about sort of, on sort of my particular past histories, but I mean, this is which is in Austria, you have a Baujahr. When was I built? Well, I was built in 1958, and I started my computing life in the last days of the mainframe computers. The Leeds University at Analogue, and I moved to Oxford University with an ICL. Remember the days when there was a computer industry in Britain. Incredible. International Computers Limited, actually built things, like we built ships and dug coal and made steel and other things like that. And I saw the arrival of the microcomputer. It was along, all of which I thought would solve all of my particular problems. I thought these would be absolutely wonderful tools. I remember buying my first Quisk hard drive, 40 megabyte hard drive, the size of a brick, but I thought the future was here and batteries were indeed supplied, And then it came along sort of, as we know, we've been talking today, we're already raising some of the particular issues of formats and migration. That is, if people do migrate their stuff. For instance, I remember I still have stuff on magnetic tape at the University of Leeds, little chance, I think, of retrieving those particular files. Then, of course, floppy disks. I never used the 8-inch disks, but I certainly used the 5.5 and the 3.25. All this sort of stuff came here. I was talking to someone recently who had a book, 6-volume book that they'd done on place names of the Isle of Man. And I asked them about, well, where are the original files? Do you still have them? They're on a floppy disk somewhere. Quote, unquote. They're on a floppy disk somewhere. Well, little chances of those being particularly right. Then we have all this accumulation, as Steve has mentioned here, this accumulation of other stuff. People who had zip drives, we've got jazz drives, people who've got duct tape. Remember the old days, I was always told that particular mantra of 3-2, 3 backups on 2 different media types. So of course people went away and did that, and now they have different media types that themselves also have to be migrated as well. And then of course we had what we thought was going to happen was got CDs. DVDs were going to be the great solution. The Irish Folklore Commission came to the Isle of Man in 1948, recorded from the last native speakers of Manx, and then this material was recently digitised and was made available on CD and DVD. Except, of course, no one now has a CD drive, so of course they now sell the books without the CDs, and you now have to look them up on YouTube. It's a great idea. That was a great idea. USB sticks, we've had those particularly mentioned as well. They were described to me recently. They got the life is lasting as long as a firefly. It's so simple as that. They just do not work. This is another thing too that was drummed into me early on. This used to be a big sign up at the Bristol University. Bristol University, going into the computing rooms at Bristol University, big sign up there saying SOS, save often, stupid. I know people who have lost. I mean, I used to do a talk for sort of incoming postgraduate students at the University of Oxford, and I had a whole catalogue of people who had misfortunes of losing data. Simple things, actually. I know people who was once doing field work in France and had their car stolen, and everything just went in the boot of the car. So on and so on and so on. But I'm not going to turn this into a particular talk on that particular area. Then, of course, as we know, we've been talking here about the issues of link rot. We've been talking about the issues of the great thing when the information superhighway it came along, 1983 with TCP/IP, and ramp on, as Al Gore was supposed to have said. He never actually said that, but he had this great enthusiasm that we would all. It was going to deliver us everything. This is a great phrase. This came about from the Afro-American archive. It doesn't exist anymore. They have this great mantra, online, real time, all the time. It's just going to give us everything. Digitize everything, and it would give us everything. And yet all this other stuff has already come. Does anyone remember the Gopher? Did anyone ever use Gopher? Yeah. Yes. Gopher came and went, didn't it? Wise. Wide Area Information System, do you ever use that? Yeah, service, those all came and went, all this sort of stuff comes. What I once thought, and I did buy into all this sort of cyber enthusiasm, whatever you want to say, I really did think that, the future had arrived, and as I say, batteries were provided this particular time, and I didn't realise that this stuff really is just a fix and it's not a solution. And I think that's one thing I'm really trying to take away from this. We've already had mention here of the particular issues of software, dead software. Does anyone remember Right Now? I was an enthusiast for Right Now because I had a Macintosh. It used machine code from the Motorola 6800 chip. That was absolutely fantastic until Apple changed their architecture and moved on to Intel chips and onto PowerPC chips. Right Now just simply stopped working. I had a whole series of transcripts of witchcraft cases from the Isle of Man, which I nearly lost all of that particular data because I didn't think about saving as RTF files, which would have been readable. I saved them as Right Now files. PageMaker. I was talking to someone who runs a publishing house who has been using PageMaker up until the current day. They're running legacy machines because they have so much material from clients, and their legacy machines are now starting to fail. Used to be able to read it into InDesign, except the InDesign has now removed the filter for reading PageMaker files. Back to Carl Roeder. I've got Carl Roeder's collected writings on Manx folklore as a set of PageMaker files. That was a great move, Stephen. And I didn't bother to actually read them out when PageMaker had its particular demise, and that's it. So that's just simply so. Another one, if anyone remembers note-taking software on the Macintosh, is a great program called Notepad Deluxe. And bad pun there, there's no deluxury now because once again Apple changed the software framework and the developers said we weren't getting as much of an income from the software as we hoped. We couldn't actually pay to have it redone. So I had a whole pile of literally hundreds of notes simply locked away in that particular software that I did manage to get out in the end, because I have a legacy Macintosh that could run. That legacy Macintosh died 2 weeks ago, so I'm now particularly facing off sort of, data loss. I say dead ideas. If you remember, we had all this particular enthusiasm for the death of the book. I once remember going to a talk and someone proclaiming it, that they had seen the last days of the book. They had seen the last days of the book, and that we would all be using hypertext. This is George Landau was the great sort of prophet there. Hypercard, hypertalk, I remember people putting a lot of effort into this. I mean, largely developing educational materials, but nevertheless, people who put resources that are only available through these particular programs locked into these particular programs. By the way, if you only ever read one book about this particular enthusiasm, the J. David Bolter book is really brilliant. It's very short, it's very concise, and it's really good. It really is a particular sense of what we could have had in that particular sense and what we've lost. And soon to go, by the way, anyone who's using PostScript Type 1 fonts in Adobe products, they're about to go. Adobe are withdrawing support so anyone who's got, like myself, who's got homebrew fonts there, which haven't come through, who's got homebrew fonts there, those are about to go and go. So as I say, what I always thought was a solution is actually not, it's just simply a fix, and it's just a fix for now. Okay, let's get on to the meat and drink. Let's just have a lot less of Stephen's sort of, what I've seen, the wonders that I have seen and the wonders that have been misplaced. And let's start with what I'm sort of looking at. What's going to happen to my stuff? As I say, what I have been struck by was how these early figures, A.W. Moore was concerned about the fate of his papers. 1893, he's already asking what's going to happen to them after I go. We know what happens, big bonfire. Probably not a good idea to try and burn hard disks or something like that. But anyway, but this is W.H. Gill. W.H. Gill, as you may or may not know, was one of the founders of the Folk Song Society. And he too was concerned about what was going to happen to his particular papers. Here he is in 1913 here, my papers, what shall I do with them? And he was also doing everything that perhaps Steve has said we should be doing, and what Tiffany said we should all be doing, is putting our papers in order, getting them ready. And he was talking about where to deposit them. He was thinking about putting them in the British Museum. He was then thinking about leaving them to Worthing Public Library, thinking about it, but not doing anything about it. This was his particular problem with this one. And so what he then thought that he would do, once again, he actually thought that he would ask someone to safeguard his papers for him. So here he is writing a little bit earlier here to Sophia Morrison here, who was another of these she was one of the Edwardian song collectors and folklore enthusiasts, one of the pan-Celtic enthusiasts in the Isle of Man as well here, and saying here, okay, well, maybe not, before I can definitely not, you must tell me exactly what you wish me to do. And I must just flick through to my notes here that I have not been following. Because what actually happened was that Sophia Morrison died in 1917, and Gill died in 1923. In fact, Gill was a remarkable character because he actually outlived everyone else, to be honest. As I say, his brother Deemster Gill dies in 1899. Dr. John Clegg dies in 1908. A.W. Moore dies in 1909. Curate dies in 1911. And Gill dies, and then the Sophia Morrison dies in 1917. And he dies in 1923, and here's a tip for success. I think we have enough time to run through this one. He told us about how it was that he actually survived, by the way. He talked about systematic exercise in the open air was what he said. This is how he actually, I presume this is some sort of early form of calisthenics or something like this. So I think perhaps if anyone's interested, we could go out to the car park at lunchtime, perhaps lay up a store of vitality, which is what we may need today to be quite frank. So already you've had these particular issues being raised. A.W. Moore thinks about what's going to happen to my papers, puts nothing in place. W.H. Gill is thinking about, once again, what should I do about my papers, puts nothing in place. What happens? He dies in 1923. His daughters toss his papers. There's no definite proof that this is what they did, but this is likely what happened. Dr. John Clegg, the other great Manx song collector, he dies 1908. He leaves all his papers to who was then the Reverend John Cooley. John Cooley becomes the Archdeacon of Man, moves up to Andrews Rectory. He retires from the rectory in 1941, tosses them. In fact, he calculates how much stuff. It took 6 to 7 tons of papers. He got all of Clegg's personal papers. They actually had to hire a steam engine to actually drag the stuff up to the north of the Isle of Man. It's an amazing. It took him years to organise. He actually organised everything, how the stuff goes. We have 4 of the Clegg tune books, and that's all. And there's 1 notebook of folklore materials. So once again, you know, the stuff passed to people who knew what had done. They knew their passion for this particular material. It just simply went. So we talk about, you know, we've had some talk here of sort of, you know, institutional repositories, and this is not to, you know, gainsay about, you know, some of the repositories that have been discussed today or will be discussed today. But I mean, this is a, you know, it's a lengthy discussion about institutional repositories. Now, most of us in this room, I don't know if any of us here have any sort of formal affiliation with a university or an institution, or if we do, it's gone. I mean, I'm now retired. I've worked at the University of Leeds, College of Ripon and York St John, University of Glasgow, Austrian Academy of Sciences, and the University of Vienna. I'm not bigging myself up, that's just where I've worked. Do any of these institutions owe me anything? If I go along and go knocking on the door at the University of Leeds and say, hi, I used to work for you, by the way, can I deposit my materials with you? If I go to University of Glasgow, if I go to University of Vienna? No, because we know what these institutional repositories, in many particular way, are set up for end-of-life projects. That's really what they're end up for. They're not particularly set up, from what I particularly feel, for sort of individual scholars, or even people who had an association with them 20, 30 years ago in that particular case. And given the pressures of higher education, we have to hope that one of the institutions don't actually go bankrupt and sort of, you know, papers are sold off, you know, papers of Stephen Miller, £5, okay, we'll get them for free, you know, this sort of stuff. People have told me here about the cloud, you know, someone once said to me, he's always said to me all the time about, you know, why don't you keep your stuff in the cloud, you know? Well, it's a wonderful organic metaphor, isn't it? I mean, the reality is a simple data structure with a physical infrastructure. It's a physical infrastructure that's threatened by the climate emergency as well. Also, too, I mean, you know, these data centres lose your data. They get corrupted data. Even the NSA server, Bumblehive, has problems, particularly maintaining its particular data. We know this happens. Servers fail, backups are not corrupted. You also have to hope that these particular data centres simply don't go bankrupt, close down. How many times have you actually switched providers for the internet in the United Kingdom? Numerous times. This stuff, these companies will come and these companies will go. I rather feel this is just one of the slides I used in another part of the particular talk. This is obviously the observations of popular antiquities. This is the, you know, I actually wonder in the future if this is just as people look back on the monasteries and wondered what happened on there. This might be the new digital equivalent. We might go to these sort of bankrupted, you know, data centres and wondered, you know, what did they used to have in there? I don't know. You know, maybe they got my PhD thesis in there somewhere. Maybe, I don't know. You know, maybe that's what we could actually happen. I say, someone who did think of using an institutional repository, one of the Edward, was Carl Roeder. Coming back to Carl Roeder here, he was an amazing collector. He was a German national, lived in Manchester, befriended a fisherman in the south of the Isle of Man, a guy called Neddy Beck Honroy, Edward Farragut, collected an amazing amount of material that we only know from looking for the material we have and the material we don't have. Let's say he had an illness. I think he had some sort of either heart disease is what he seemed to have. Packed all his stuff up, went and came back, and now it's gone. This could almost have been a title for the course, for the talk, you know, irrevocably gone. This is it. His material's just simply lost. So all along, you know, I'm sort of trying to build, you know, people here aware that their materials are going to go. People trying to find someone to look after their particular materials, which doesn't all work out. Here, actually using a depository for materials as well. This doesn't work out as well. And this is back to Sophia Morrison. This is the Edison phonograph purchased by the Manx Language Society, purchased in 1904, very early on this one, and purchased in 1904, first used in 1905. Their idea, because the 1901 census had shown for them a remarkably large numbers of native speakers of Manx Gaelic. Nowadays, you could show that the language was in many ways terminal decline, but nevertheless there were enough people left that they thought that they could then, by recording the Manx language, by preserving the Manx language, that they could bring the language back as a community language again. And so, but this of course is what happened, you know, once again. They thought that by using the wax cylinders, they were well aware of the playback time, and they would actually decay. What actually happened in this particular sense here, this is all that is left of their particular recording program, is a box containing 8 broken records. Once again lost. You know, well, once again, I'm struck here about how these individuals, they're all well aware that they are trying to take the intangibles of an expressive oral culture, make it permanent as they see it, fixing it onto a particular carrier, which these carriers themselves, such as wax cylinders especially, are as equally fragile as carriers than the particular traditions that they see are going on under their, you know, are going.
And even in 1906, they didn't know how to use the apostrophe properly.
No, that's John Nelson. Yeah, he was a very difficult character, John Nelson, in many ways. He was a teetotaler who ran the Central Hotel in Ramsey. Yes. And this is another thing too I didn't discuss. This is actually one of Bertrand Bronson's punch cards. This is you know one you know. There's too much emphasis on the foundation of digital humanities in the work of Father Busa, whereas in fact Bronson was I think earlier to him than that. So good luck trying to actually make use of those particular cards. Okay, I'm coming to the middle. I'm running through my turn. This is one of the cylinders from the Manx Language Society's recording program. As I say, it's one of the broken cylinders. It can't be played. So you know what they thought. There was a great speech when the president of the Manx Language Society in 1905 sort of said now that these wax cylinders, they will outlive the speakers themselves, and they were soon unplayable. And so in fact the speakers themselves outlived the wax cylinders. And so you know, you know what I'm really questioning here is that you know this almost like was the analog way of trying to preserve, you know, sort of Manx culture. And this is my hard drive sitting down. I got a 4 terabyte one. There's a 4 terabyte hard drive there. And I suppose the question is, I suppose what we're all asking today as well, is that, you know, is that going to become the equivalent of what the Manx Language Society had? Is that going to be just yet another broken record, just absolutely sitting there? Okay, I don't know if this was someone who was being provocative when I first gave this particular talk, but someone just simply said, well, it's not your problem. You know, leave it for others to worry about. Oh, okay, that's very easy. I'll leave it for others to worry. Well, who? I don't think Tiffany wants to hear that. Well, see, here you go. Got the hard drive. You worry about it, you know. You know, what did we lose, you know, with the loss of A.W. Moore's papers? A hell of a lot. What did we lose with Reuter's papers? A hell of a lot. What did we lose with Gill's papers? A hell of a lot, you know. What we're going to simply lose is being descriptive here, basically of the particular resources for our discipline. What to do? I did promise this in the talk, and I think this is a rather bit of a weak slide, I think what to do. In some ways, all you can really do is state the obvious, to be honest, but I still think this one is perhaps the most important one. Is, you know, a literary executor. It sounds very grandiose, a literary executor, as though he's like, yeah, but I don't write novels, I don't write poems, I don't write screenplays, you know what to do. Basically, I think, get it down, black and white, what it is you want to do with your particular materials, negotiate with an archive whether they're willing to actually take your particular materials as well. I used the word literary executor when I was doing the research for this paper. There's another phrase for it, which is a digital death care plan. It sounds like something Saba is going to start to try and sell me, isn't it? You know. No, let's just use the word literary executor. That'll make us feel this person. Get a literary executor. And by the way, I get someone who's a generation younger than you, not your best friend. I'm dealing with the negotiations for a literary estate to try and reprint the book, to find that somebody to publish their literary executor was the same age as them. Not the best of things. Someone younger than you. Someone who knows the root passwords for your desktop and all your other particular accounts. I know quite obvious stuff as well, but you know, test it out, test it out. How many people do indeed know the passwords? You know, both of your passwords. Back up and back up again. You know, we heard locks, which is the great thing. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. You know, have backups here. And there's another thing. All I can say is sounds quite obvious and quite pathetic actually, but be orderly in your file structure. You know, I'm just doing yet another set of backups because I just lost control of, you know, I couldn't find stuff. And I first say, if I can't find it, you're not going to be able to find it. It's as simple as that. So I think we should follow what Gill did. You know, be orderly in particular papers. And then when you try and be orderly in your papers, of course, you come across this sort of stuff we're talking here about, you know. Yes, linking to a template, of course. Well, the template can't be there because Microsoft Office, of course, is no longer Office X, is it? It's moved away, it's got a new path name, bum, 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 you know. So you always got to start thinking here about checking your files, migrating them. It's work, but it's work that needs to be done. Otherwise, it's going to end up like here. You know, this is what I was thinking. You know, this is sort of, you know, this is someone here trying to figure out the Glendarrick stone circle in the Isle of Man here, trying to think, you know, well, is there anything missing, or is there, you know, should there be a stone there? Maybe not. I don't know. You know, and I picked this because it's a nice spiral thing. Is, but again, we sure be using solid state drives, so we won't have that. At the end of the day, is it really worth it? I'll finish with here's I found this quite, I was doing some work on Leslie Grinsell. You may know him for folklore and prehistoric sites in Britain. He deposited the copy of his manuscript that was later on he published in 1976. But nevertheless, he's saying here, you know, a copy of my, this is in the Society of Antiquaries of London. Send you a copy of my folklore prehistoric monuments. He says, I'm sending you the original. In case the political situation suddenly gets worse before we've had time to do anything. Look, the date's 26th of August 1939. You know, so this I think is the other thing. This is the great existential threat in many ways, which we can't do anything about. But I think this is one of the reasons why we really haven't. I think perhaps an emotional note here, but you know, when we do have war in Europe again, that to be reminded of why we do this, to actually basically keep access to the particular materials of our particular culture. So I can't say any more than that. Thank you. I've run a bit over time.
Good morning. Sabin Baring-Gould was a popular novelist and a writer about many topics other than folk song. So it's not a surprise that when he died in 1924, cartloads of paper were taken to a local quarry and burned. Yet the family did save a lot of material, including many of the manuscripts that interest those of us who care about folk song. Before he died, Baring-Gould had already given 2 important folk song manuscripts to Plymouth Library and had also donated a large collection of broadside ballads to the British Library. In 1989, the discovery of manuscript material among the books that had been taken from his home to fill the library shelves at Killerton House in Devon energised a new hunt for other manuscripts and a better understanding of what was available. Now that search occupied me and colleagues in the Sabin Baring-Gould Appreciation Society for some years, and we've been very grateful for the continuing support we've received from Baring-Gould's descendants, and particularly Dr. Mariel Ullman, Baring-Gould's great-granddaughter, and her family. Now, our leading archive, the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, has very little material related to Baring-Gould in its physical collection, though its digital archive does have images of most of his manuscripts as a result of the Devon Tradition project of 2011. And this slide lays out the scope of the Baring-Gould papers. Now, linked from the VWML's Baring-Gould page you will find a lengthy description of the various manuscripts there. So I don't propose to talk about the manuscripts themselves, but to focus on the archives that hold them and some of the changes, both welcome and unwelcome, that I've seen over the years. I first visited Plymouth Library in the early 1980s to look at the Baring-Gould manuscripts there. Now this picture is the Plymouth City Library and Museum shortly after it was opened in 1910 with funding from Andrew Carnegie and under the guardianship of Baring-Gould's friend W.H.K. Wright as the chief librarian. The building was gutted by enemy action in the Second World War and thousands of books were lost. But many of the more valuable items, including the Baring-Gould manuscripts, had been moved to safety, and the library was rebuilt within the shell of the old fabric. The Baring-Gould manuscripts were available for public consultation, but the collection was considerably enhanced by the bequest in 1955 of Francis Nicol, who left the library his collection of more than 400 books and articles by Baring-Gould, as well as his own notes and transcriptions. Nicol was a great fan. You could say he was a bit obsessive about Baring-Gould and a friend of his half-brother Arthur. And his bequest included what is now known as Working Notebook 1, which started life as a fair copy, but was later used for notes and for some field notation of words by Baring-Gould, the only example of such notation that remains. Nicol's papers also include copies of magazine articles written by Baring-Gould and several handwritten transcriptions of articles that he could only see in reference libraries. His intention was to have a copy of everything that Baring-Gould wrote. And while he didn't achieve this objective, he got a long way towards it. And this enabled him to compile the first bibliography of Baring-Gould's work. The other resource in Plymouth is the Plymouth and West Devon Record Office. Plymouth was a county borough before it came under the control of Devon County in 1974. And then, in 1998, responsibility for the archive returned to Plymouth City Council, now a unitary authority. When I visited the record office in the 1990s, the facilities were very poor, housed in a former industrial building as a temporary measure after the war. The County Council had received notice from the government that they would take control of the archive if the situation were not improved. And finally, 2 decades later than that, a new building called The Box was opened in 2020. This was built in the space formerly occupied by Carnegie's Library and Museum building and St Luke's Church, which was behind it. The new building houses a greatly improved museum as well as the former Plymouth and West Devon archive. The City Library was moved to a former shop in the city centre, where most of the local studies material can now be consulted, though many of the Baring-Gould files are held off-site. The most valuable items from the library, including the Baring-Gould manuscripts, were transferred to the box. The archive also holds a small group of additional manuscripts and music purchased by the library in the 1970s. And these include a small manuscript notebook containing the notation of 9 songs from a visit to the village of Lamerton, as recorded by Baring-Gould's colleague Henry Fleetwood Shepherd, the only example of his work that remains. Now, while I've visited both the library in its new location and the box, I've not yet tried to study in either. In the old building, there was a large room which housed the local studies library, and Nicol's collection of Baring-Gould's books were placed on the top shelf, running around 2 sides of the building. And I'm nostalgic for the old facilities and grateful that I'd already obtained much of the information that I need from them. and knowing that the collection was going to be unavailable for some time while it was rehoused, I photographed a lot of items that were of particular interest, and I'm still working with this material. While it can't be thought of as an archive any longer, I'd like to talk about the collection at Killerton House, near Exeter, as it was until 2012. When the property was given to the National Trust by the socialist peer Sir Richard Ackland, the Ackland family books were removed, leaving the library empty at a time when structural problems were being experienced with the Baring Gould Library at his former home at Lew Trenchard. With the help of the Plymouth librarian Bill Best Harris, a selection of over 3,000 books was transferred to Killerton to fill the shelves. Best Harris chose many of the most attractive books from the library at Lew House and curated a library that was pleasing to the eye. The books were protected from the public with fishing line and fierce National Trust ladies. In 1992, while I was involved in recording a concert in the Killerton Library, the house manager showed me what I later realised was Sabine Baring Gould's personal manuscript of the songs that he'd collected with over 2,000 entries under 700 headings. I obtained permission from the National Trust and from Muriel Almond to examine and index the manuscripts. And in breaks from that work, I also looked at the collection of books overall. The collection included many of Baring Gould's reference books, covering a wide range of topics. There are some of the volumes of sagas that he brought back from Iceland in 1863, interleaved with pages of his notes and translations. There are editions of many of the books that Baring Gould wrote himself, often with reviews and letters tucked inside. There are books about the songs sung on London stages in the 18th century. There are the books of folk songs, some given to him by fellow collectors such as Sharp and Kidson. But by this time I'd left Devon and was living in Gloucestershire, and for several years I would take days off work to drive exactly 100 miles to Killerton, spend a day in the library working on the manuscripts when the house was closed to the public. That work provided the index that was issued with the microfiche edition of the manuscript collection in 1998, and which laid the ground for the documentation of the collection when it went online in 2011. Then, in 2012, Muriel Almond had a letter from the National Trust advising her that they would like the Baring Gould book collection to be removed so that they could use the library for books the visitors could read. We were faced with the task of finding a new home for the books. After exploring various possibilities, it was agreed that the manuscripts would be transferred to the Devon Record Office in Exeter, where they would join several other Baring Gould papers that had been discovered at Killerton and moved there some years earlier. The 3,000 books were more of a problem, but the Special Collections Library at Exeter University agreed to accept them, and that is where they will now be found. There are more wins than losses with these changes. There were no proper facilities for studying the manuscripts at Killerton, and I sometimes got very cold in the winter when the heating wasn't on. It's no longer possible, though, to see those shelves full of beautiful books and to look along the lines on the shelves and pick out something for study. But both repositories offer more security in the longer term, though I still feel a bit aggrieved about the National Trust's actions. So I'll move on to talk about the Devon Heritage Centre, formerly known as the Devon Record Office. When I first visited the Devon Record Office, it was in a building adjoining the Exeter Central Library. Like Plymouth, Exeter's Carnegie-funded library from the 1930s had been destroyed in the war with the loss of 1 million books and historic papers. The shell of the building was repaired and a new stock of books purchased, but there was insufficient space for the library and the record office, both of which were growing. In 1965, a new building was opened next door to the original library, which now became the domain of the Records Office. It was here that I indexed the fair copy manuscript from a photocopy of the document in Plymouth. But space was still an issue, and in 1985 the Record Office moved to a former British Telecom depot on an industrial estate on the edge of Exeter. The local studies library was also relocated to the same building, and this has proved a great place to work, not least because it's close to the M5. And I've spent a lot of time here working with the Baring Gould manuscripts and more recently with Doreen Senior's papers. Devon County Council are no longer responsible for what's now called the Devon Heritage Centre. That responsibility has shifted to a charitable trust, the South West Heritage Trust, who are based in Somerset and also manage the Somerset Heritage Centre, the North Devon Record Office, as well as other museums and heritage sites in the area. As well as the folk song manuscripts and the popular literature volumes, there were 35 boxes of papers delivered to the Devon Record Office from Killerton, which contained a mixture of manuscript, printed articles and books. The collection was box listed with the intention of sorting it out and reboxing it at a later date. Apart from a bit of reboxing on the grounds of the weight of the boxes, that day has yet to come. It is a glorious jumble, and I have over the years examined all the boxes fairly carefully. They contain further song material, including 3 early fair copies of his work, now known as Working Notebooks 2, 3 and 4. There are family pictures, including paintings by Baring Gould. There's correspondence with some of Baring Gould's main publishers. And the boxes also contain many printers' proofs and magazine articles written by Baring Gould. This part of the collection was largely the work of the aforementioned Francis Nicol, who was charged by Baring Gould's son, Edward, with the task of obtaining copies of his father's books and articles which the family didn't have. There's still a lot to be discovered in these boxes. I should mention that the History Centre also contains the work of the late Dr. Ron Warman, who examined and transcribed Baring Gould's diaries and other important manuscripts. There are other archives that hold items associated with Baring Gould, particularly his letters. The Surrey History Centre holds Lucy Broadwood's papers, which include her diaries, which mention time spent with Baring Gould, as well as several letters from him. Broadwood's correspondence was split between the Surrey Archive and the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, which was given most of the letters related to her folk song activities, including many of the letters that Baring Gould wrote to Broadwood about folk song. The VWML also has letters written by Baring Gould to Cecil Sharp during the period when they were working together. This picture records a visit by Muriel Almond and her husband Doug to the VWML in 2009, when we discussed adding the Baring Gould manuscripts to the VWML Digital Archive. Another institution which holds material related to Baring Gould is the British Library, who have 10 large volumes of broadside ballads that Baring Gould gave to the British Museum in 1898. This is one of their most important collections of 19th century broadsides, and a generous gift considering that Baring Gould was often short of ready cash and had sold at least 2 other volumes of broadsides. The furthest I've travelled to look at Baring Gould's papers is to the Helton Library at Harvard University, and this is where the letters and songs that he sent to Professor Francis Child over a 3-year period from 1890 are kept. Sian and I made a complete transcription of these several years ago, but it's only now that I'm looking at them in detail, preparing for a paper that I'm giving at the American Folklore Society conference in November. We don't have any of Child's letters to Baring Gould, but it appears that after some initial scepticism, he was genuinely interested in Baring Gould's discoveries. Lastly, I'd like to go back to the place where it all started, Sabin Baring Gould's home, Loo House, or Loo Trenchard Manor, as the hotel it has become is called. Despite the cartloads of paper that were removed after his death, and a 3-day sale of books and furniture in the 1930s, in which one lot of 2,000 books sold for £8, and then the removal of 3,000 books to Killertham House, there are still about 2,000 volumes from the original library in the house. There are several interesting items, such as 18th century songsters, and a number of Cecil Sharp's publications which were a gift from the collector. The hotel was closed 2 years ago after no one could be found to take on the lease of the house because of its poor condition and serious structural problems with the roof. It has recently reopened after major refurbishment. My worry was that the books might get lost along the way. I should have had more faith because Ian Maxted, who has indexed the whole of Baring Gould's library, has been monitoring the process closely and was on hand last month when the boxes of books were returned for reshelving. There is also another collection which is to be returned to the house, and that is the David Shacklock collection. David was the founder of the Sabin Baring Gould Appreciation Society in 1989, and a keen bibliophile who also specialised in the novels of G.A. Henty. He set out to make a collection of the books in which Baring Gould was mentioned. In 2018, he donated his collection of about 1,100 books to the Baring Gould Corporation to be housed permanently at Loo Trenchard. Now, in this presentation, I've described some of the archives and libraries that I visited in connection with my research into the life and work of Sabin Baring Gould. I find that over the last 40 years, I've visited over 40 different libraries and archives in search of him and other folk song collectors. The staff I have met have almost always been pleasant and helpful. I've only been to one archive where the guards carried guns. Most archives now allow you to photograph the material you're looking at. Some will charge a flat fee for a day's work, asking only that you list what you are photographing and then sign a declaration that you won't share it with anyone else and that you won't use the images in a commercial venture. There are still others that charge by the item. Libraries tend to be less restrictive. I was an early adopter of digital photography, and I've several thousand images of documents that I've collected over the years, and many of those are still on my list of future projects. These form part of what is, in fact, an archive of my own, together with my own collection of manuscript letters by Baring Gould and other items by or about him that I've garnered over the years. That archive also contains the transcriptions that Sian and I have made of the manuscripts, as well as studies of the songs and the singers and the articles that I've written over the half-century that I've been studying Baring Gould's work. So, thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting to hear how the various repositories holding the Baring Gould manuscripts have changed over the years and of the political decisions that have driven those changes. I draw your attention to it's not there. I wonder what happened there. Anyway, I thought I'd added, now I know what I did. Do look out for my website, which Steve inexcusably omitted to mention, www.sbgsongs.org, where you can find a lot of this information. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Just an observation, I came up last night to stay over and popped in the local Weatherspoons, for a reliable, decent pint and some cheaper food. Not so reliable, but But, you know, in those places, you know, they often have, you know, and I sat in the quiet bit and there was like loads of books there. And you just think, where did they get those from? And now I think I know, in the sense that, you know, suddenly I've just got a whole load of books I need to get rid of, and they end up obscurely in places just to fill the shelves, which, you know, and yeah. It's just incredible, really.
Well, yes, like many of us in the room, I have a large research library. I haven't actually counted, but probably is a four-figure sum. Getting rid of that is going to be an interesting exercise. But
Yeah, so where's it going?
the dealer who offers most of the money. So yes, Julia. You
Oh, it's only a quick question, really, picking up on your points. When I go to National Trust and other country house properties, I just look at the library and I think, has anyone ever catalogued? Is there a catalogue? Is there a central listing of all those National Trust property libraries, for example?
Yes.
Yes,
There
there
is.
is.
Usually
Yeah,
National
that's
Trust
just
do have a
purely-
catalogue of all the books in their library.
Do they? Yeah, I've never investigated, but I often wonder, because there's a lot of antiquarian stuff and things of interest, isn't
There
there?
usually is somewhere.
So just a warning message really, if you go a few hundred yards down the road, there's a pub that used to be called the Longford, and when that was in one of its many incarnations, they had books on the shelves in each of the bars. So I was in there having lunch one day and I thought, that's an interesting one. And I went to get it and they were glued to the shelf. They've now had another incarnation, the books have vanished. But where? And so it's very difficult to tell what you might find in one of these sorts of places.
I can tell you a story. Croydon Libraries. New library was built, so the old library was being repurposed as a meeting room and a wedding receptions and stuff. It was an old-fashioned library, so it had a lovely gallery round it, you know, I don't know how many feet, anyway, gallery round, which was full of books and stuff. So when they repurposed it, they looked at books and said, well, we want it to look like an old library, but they're not attractive enough. So they took out all the old books and put in fake books. So they do look really nice. You know, from the ground floor, they look wonderful, you know, leather binding and all sorts of stuff. But they're all just backs of books glued to the wall.
Well, perhaps that's preferable to putting the books there and nobody looking.
I like this picture of Alfred Williams and his wife Mary. Probably taken in the 1920s. They look relaxed together. Sort of, it's in the Wiltshire Instrument Record Office, and I permission to use it for presentations. I last did something. I think it was, I can't remember how long ago it was. Anyway, yes, Alfred Williams. A bit about me as well along the way, because most of you have never seen me before, heard of me, and it puts some context in. But first, the tough dead lark flies over the plain, the southern breezes blow, the dew bombs wet on the bending grain, cheerily, merrily, oh, the panting horses of the day leap into the eastern sky. Now is the time to be up and away, mid the brown lass and I, from daylight to starlight, through the noisy heat of a noon. No rest we'll find but to rave and bind till the coming of the moon. Alan Bryars and John Alderslade were very well known in West Wiltshire. They wrote this tune and introduced this song at least once as being by the Wiltshire vernacular poet Will Mead. It is, in fact, Williams' poem The Reaper, adapted for a song. Now I grew up in a council house in Birkenhead. It was a sought-after housing for working people. My parents' musical taste was Frank Sinatra and Peggy Lee. My early sources of folk music were TV shows such as the White Heather Club, Grief and Glory, Hallelujah, and the Spinners, who several times featured Stan Hugel, shantyman and author. In 1965-66, I attended a concert at the Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool, one of the folk at the Gill series. Ian Campbell was the real key for me, but one of the early acts was his trio, the Young Tradition. And my eyes were open to a completely different kind of English folk music. So, my thanks to Ian Campbell and Peter Bellamy for the last 60 odd years. Excuse me. My wife said I get a dry throat, she's right. Yes, no. I worked in public libraries. Comments made by Steve were, well, almost biographical, I suppose you could say. I worked in libraries in Liverpool and London from 72, and from 72 to my retirement in 2004 in Wiltshire. There I came across Upper Room's folk songs of the Upper Thames, which I devoured, later discovering that the Wiltshire and Swindon office held his archive. I joined Barthampton Morrisman in 1974, became squire, then foreman from 1994 for 16 years. And then in 2014, I was asked by the squire of the Morris Ring to take on the role of chairing the Morris Ring Archive Group until 2024. And the archive is held in the Essex Record Office in Chelmsford. My work in Wiltshire and Essex meant working closely with the archivists, and I developed an understanding of and respect for their professional skills. Just press the click. Some of you technology here, people. I'm pressing the button, it isn't doing anything. Is it the other way? Oh, there it is. Right. In this poem, Annus Mirabilis, published in 1974, Philip Larkin wrote this. And in his introduction, well, I do remember the Beatles' first LP. They were just across the river in Liverpool. And in his introduction to folk songs of the Upper Thames, Alfred Williams wrote this. None of these statements is entirely true. Williams, unlike the other collectors of his generation, was a working class. He was born in 1877 and died in 1930, aged 53. His father, a carpenter, early abandoned his wife and his 8 children. This was the era of the workhouse. Alfred started working part-time on a farm at the age of 8, full-time at the age of 11. At age 14, he started the Great Western Railway Works. He had absorbed songs and stories from those around him. This was his early cultural life. In his introduction to the 1984 edition of Williams' Life in a Railway Factory, Michael Justin Davis wrote, which clearly identifies his familiarity with folk song long before 1914. World War I broke out in July 1914, and Williams stopped working in September. According to his biographer, Leonard Clark, in the next 23 months, he cycled over 7,000 miles, collected and began to publish songs in the archives, the articles in the Wilson and Gloucester Standard. So, returning to what experience I bring to this, for over 15 years, I was the senior manager in Wiltshire Library Service, responsible for reference and local study services. My last 2 projects, and before I retired, was the scoping and implementing of Wiltshire's proposals for the National People's Network project to provide public use PCs in all 30 libraries in the county. It became operational in 2002, with at least 1 PC in the smallest library and more in the larger ones. then local studies librarian approached me with a proposal which evolved into the Wiltshire Community History website. I knew I'd stumble over that. He, the County Council's web manager, and I scoped the project, which would be available via the People's Network in libraries. There was no widespread domestic broadband at the time, and it was 2007 before the smartphone it was invented. Its initial purpose was to allow people, especially children, in local communities, the civil parishes, to discover key information about the locality. The range of information to be made available included Swindon declared UDI from Wiltshire sometime in the 19th century. The populations, this data is not easy to find if you're living in a rural county. It's required access to the Victoria County history, and then there's a whole series of census reports for each of the decades. And for each community we had the local population in a particular decade and the county's population at that time, so you could draw comparisons between. Also, there you go, and after retiring, I approached my former colleagues with a proposal to adapt this website to add a folk arts element to it. I do the work as a volunteer, to which they eventually agreed. My source, of course, was the Alfred Williams archive held in the Wiltshire and Swindon Record Office. It resulted in an additional link to the songs and plays there. Now we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before. My work on the songs collected in Wiltshire was enabled by others, and I started with Babe and Clissold. It is said that they combed through the archive, searching for songs. They brought the material together into the 6 packets and devised the index and organised the songs in the way seen today. The second, Andrew Baith, was another key player, son of Colin, and this is his thesis, published 2006. It was invaluable, especially as he gave me a PDF, a copy of it. Really useful to research a document like that, whereas the copy in Vaughan Williams Library is the original paper version, unless you've got a PDF as well now. Where am I to now? Oh yes. During the my project, I corresponded with the late Chris Behrman, the late Willem Davis, and Julia Bishop, Martin Gray, Steve Rao, Malcolm Taylor, your predecessor, and Mike Yates, and the ever helpful staff at the Wiltshire and Swindon Record Office. All of them offered advice, guidance, and pointers at different times, so I thanks them all. But I must mention my wife, Jane Batchelor, proofreader and editor extraordinaire. Oh yes. Today, I want to cover the 3 themes of the conference through So, this is the top level catalogue entry for the Williams folk songs. This is the item level description, which is as far as archival cataloguing usually goes. The totals at the end of each line are the songs collected in each county. I found 144 further songs from fragments up to a complete text, not listed by Baith and Clissold, which I've labelled. There's a cultural reference in there too. The Orchard Catalogue gives a clear indication of what can be found in the record office, but for the folk enthusiast, the crucial question is this. Where am I to now? Yeah. This is where our project begins. With the seventh song, with the seventh Wiltshire song, it was clear that a song could be from more than one source. William's note for the gamekeeper and my faith in Bates Clissold's in prefixes was lost. With this note, I'm to Johnny the ship's carpenter. For those of you who know your geography, South Sandy is in Gloucestershire. William's main source in South Sandy was James Mills, who gave him 14 songs. But he also collected 3 from Thomas Bourne, so it could be either. While Bates and Clissold can be celebrated for their work, gathering the song text into one place, the attribution of a song to a single county is in part misleading. I thought that the multiple attributions could exist in all 4 county brackets, and that was the case. So where am I now? Oh yes. So I presented my findings to my colleagues, and they agreed for the project to be extended to include the text of 55 Birmingham folk plays, complete or fragmentary, are reproduced. Best known is from True. Andrew Baith did a lot of family history work for his thesis in the days before you could do it online. Using Ancestry, I was able to further identify incorrectly transcribed names, the Falklanders, Faulkners, Price North, and to provide birth, death, marriage, and census data to give a fuller but still brief summary of their lives. William's notes are brief, sometimes slightly inaccurate, and on occasions completely misleading. David Sawyer had not lived at Ogbourne for at least 40 years before he was collected. Sam Hinder of Cradwell had been living in Swindon since at least 1891, when he was working for the GWR, and he was not alone among Williams singers, nominally based in their home communities, while working and living in Swindon according to the 1911 and earlier censuses. Williams had very strong views about modern culture corrupting the rustic mind, and I think that explains his relocation from urban to rural. An examination of the census data can also reveal changes in circumstances. Alfred Tilly Barnett, source of the 3 songs, is recorded as a mapmaker. That's his dad and his brother. And then I think that Alfred had suffered a serious industrial injury, precluding him from working as a blacksmith. The songs and plays can be found here. Yes. They can be searched by crucial report if you're doing your local community research. But be without Steve Rout, you know. Wish I'd thought of it, but there you are. It's brilliant. I've jumped a slide. Now, William's notes for Bold Reynolds says, a copy obtained of John Puffett Letchley, Gloucestershire, and David Sawyer Ogborn. Unusually, this song is given a Wiltshire prefix. It should be Gloucestershire. But Sawyer was one of William's main contributors, and I think that's why it's not where it should be under Gloucestershire, but is in Wiltshire. And so you can't always believe what people tell you about sources and that sort of thing. This example, the ancient poetry song, includes the primary source and secondary sources. I worked out a style of newspaper citations for parts and numbering, which I'm glad to say Martin used when he published his book, The Forgotten Songs of the Upper Thames. The data for each song includes the singer, their location, William's notes. That's from the published sources, whether it's the newspaper articles in the Wilts and Gloucester Standard or in Folk Songs of the Upper Thames and other things too. And the X series, this one, are my continuation of beta class of numbering, but distinguishing my material from theirs. So it is coherent. Another example of a possible identification with singer is this. In a Wiltshire village, 1912, Williams wrote these statements. You might recognise the line. In packet 5, miscellaneous, is the text of Farmer's Boy, MI 565, with no singular location listed. Family history searches show that John James Bolton of South Marston, William's home village, died in 1903, aged 63. In the 1871 census, he is described as a carter, significant. In later censuses, as an agricultural labourer. Jemmy could not admonish the carter boys if he wasn't a carter. Working class rules. You don't step on somebody else's territory. So he's a carter. My belief is that Jemmy and John James Bolton are the same person. Can't be proved, but it's probable. Securing long-term access. As long as Wiltshire Council or its successors exist and are willing to host the fruits of my research, they will remain freely available. The copyright is mine, and I have made provisions in my will, think of a commentator, as to what its reassignment after my death. But to return to Williams, in his introduction, Davis wrote, and later, you can't trust doctors really, can you? In rereading The Life in a Railway Factory, I came across this. It's about the latrines in the Great Western Railway Works. I think Williams is a chaste and modest man. repelled by the situation described above. No longer working, his digestive system rapidly returned to normal. The recovery freed him to be able to cycle 7,000 miles, collecting at least 755 songs, and being fit enough for military service in India by 1916. Recruiting standards were probably lower, reduced because of losses on the Western Front, but his posting to India led to another significant phase in his life. His health was no longer an issue. We, the beneficiaries of his collecting, must be grateful for his recovery. Thank you.
Time for questions?
Oh, yes, yes, sorry, I was scurrying off.
I think you've pointed out something that Catherine already mentioned, that's the problem of when somebody has given things a number, you know, they've given it a wheelchair number because it should really be Gloucester. But those who come after, do we then renumber everything? Everybody who has cited that in a book or an article is now wrong, or do we carry on knowing that it's wrong, but not being able to do something about it, apart from put a footnote in saying this is wrong? And the longer it goes on, the worse it gets.
Well, and it will say this has been a problem for decades, centuries.
Well, yes.
And today, when it's so easy, pick up the phone, quick email, and you've got to ask everybody concerned, you know, in the work of a couple of hours, whether we should change this number to the other one. So easy to do today, but we still don't do it.
It's still, well, I don't think it's as easy as it sounds.
Well, somebody at work said, well, you are a pedant, Aldrich. And I thought, well, yes, I am. In this instance, Nathan Clissold did a phenomenal job, and you have to respect them for that.
Yes.
And I think you must show respect for people who've gone before. And if they chose to misalign a song to a different county, in one sense it doesn't matter, because both perfectly on the Wiltshire site, because it was done as community focused. There are two copies of the song, Brinkworth and the other, which I can't remember off the top of my head. So if you're looking for songs collected in Brinkworth, you can find them. If you're looking for songs collected in Marlborough, you can find them, or wherever it might be. And so the choice by Bath and Clissold to do that, I'm not sure matters, because you can read William's note, you can see, oh, it was collected in Lechside and in Wiltshire, so the data's there. So that might be a bit slippery for people who are also pedants, but it works for me as a worker.
Just to say how much we appreciated Chris's work when we were putting together the Gloucestershire website, because obviously he's got loads of information about Gloucestershire. Personally, particularly the ancestry work you did, because I was doing a similar thing for our singers as well, and obviously a lot of the work had already been done by Chris on the Williams collection. The only comment I have is that at some point Wiltshire Record Office decided they were going to relocate everything to a different place. So all the links we had painstakingly set up were then wrong. So we've had to get somebody else to reinstate the links. So this is the sort of danger you have when you're linking to somebody else that you've got no control over. But thank you, Chris.
But it's very frustrating. It didn't just apply to me. Steve and Malcolm Taylor came to the launch of this in 2004, and we'd agreed to have links between the image of the manuscript, and William's writing isn't the easiest in the world to decipher, and my printed versions. But Wiltshire relocated its site, and all those links disappeared. And so it was possible to see the original Williams material, my transcription, and discover I did make mistakes along the way. But it's every time somebody
brings up it's easy much in the same one. You got that word wrong. You say, fine, I'll change it. And that's the difference between doing stuff online and doing it in a book. Once the book's printed, it's done. We also started with relatively few songs because they went on as I did them. And so again, doing these sequentially works online in a way it doesn't if you're printing. I didn't have to wait 5 years to finish the book and index it. I could just do it. So I did. The crucial thing is, I'd worked in Wiltshire for all those years. I knew the archivists really well, they knew me. And I was a trusted individual who had access to the archive, whom they knew would not try and damage it. You know, and my continuing working on it depended on the trust being reciprocated. So it was great fun, and I was in the record office about 3 or 4 weeks ago, looking at 4 packets that I'd not looked at before, and there's more to come. Not a lot, but there's more to come. Anything else? It's lunchtime then. Sorry, I'm taking a few.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.